For most of my life, I believed in loyalty, love, and the foundation of family. I thought if you gave yourself fully to a relationship, a commitment, a duty, it would mean something. It would last. But life has a cruel way of showing you how fragile trust can be, and how sometimes the people you cherish most are the ones who break you in ways you never see coming. I spent years married to a man I thought was mine, raising a son I thought was ours, living a life I believed was real, but none of it was, not in the way I had imagined. It all unraveled on an ordinary evening, a night that should have been like any other. My husband, Leo, had just returned from his latest deployment. He was tired, adjusting to home life again, trying to settle back into the routine he'd left behind. But something was off. I saw it in his eyes, searching, questioning, like he was trying to find an answer to a question he hadn't yet spoken aloud. And then it happened. I was in the kitchen folding laundry when I saw him, flipping through a stack of old documents, just paperwork, nothing unusual. But suddenly, he stopped. His fingers froze on a single sheet of paper, and in an instant, everything changed. His face, once warm and familiar, turned cold and distant. "What's this?" His voice was quiet, too quiet. I turned to see what he was holding. My heart dropped. A hospital bill, one I had buried deep, tucked away like a ghost of a past I never wanted to face again. But now, here it was, right in his hands. "Leo, He cut me off, his eyes scanning the paper with terrifying focus. Then they flicked back to me, sharp and unforgiving. "My brother's name is on here," he said, his voice trembling. "Not mine." Silence. The kind that suffocates. The kind that stretches until there's no air left to breathe. "Tell me it's a mistake," he demanded. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." I wanted to. God, I wanted to lie, to rewrite history, to protect him from the truth. But I couldn't. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal. Tears welled in my eyes, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain the unexplainable? How could I justify the unforgivable? He slammed the paper down onto the table. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. "How long?" he whispered, but his quiet words felt heavier than any scream. My hands shook. It was a mistake, Leo." He laughed bitterly, a sound so cold it sent shivers down my spine. "A mistake?" he spat. "Leaving the stove on is a mistake. Forgetting a birthday is a mistake. This is a betrayal." "I was lonely," I sobbed. "You were gone so long and I—" "Don't you dare justify this," he snapped, his whole body trembling with the effort to hold back his rage. "I love you," I whispered. He shook his head slowly. "No. If you did, you wouldn't have done this." And then came the blow that shattered the last pieces of my world. "He doesn't know," I whispered. "He thinks you're his father." Leo went still, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. His eyes flicked toward the hallway where our son, his nephew, played, innocent and oblivious. When Leo finally moved, it was like watching a man fall apart. He turned his back and walked out the door. No words, no goodbye, just gone. Days passed, then weeks, then months. He never came back. The divorce papers arrived with no note, no explanation. Just a cold, clean end to a life that had once meant everything. And just when I thought the pain couldn't cut any deeper, the final blow came, a phone call. "There's been an accident," the voice said. The world blurred. My legs gave out. The next thing I knew, I was staring at the stillness of the man I had loved and betrayed, lying lifeless beneath sterile white sheets. Leo was gone, and with him went any chance of forgiveness. With barely restrained fury, he said, "You had no right, no right." I cut him off, my own anger rising. No right to tell him the truth, to tell him what his father did. He deserved to know, whether you liked it or not. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Then my mother's quiet, pleading voice. "He's furious with your brother, Leo. He won't speak to him. He packed a bag and left." I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. I should have expected this. My nephew wasn't the kind to sit with a lie. Not once he knew the truth. And after years of worshiping a man he thought was honorable, the foundation had cracked. "Where is he now?" I asked, my voice softer. "We don't know," my mother admitted, her voice shaking. "His fiancée said he's staying with a friend, but she won't tell us where." I closed my eyes, picturing him, hands clenched, jaw tight, trying to piece together a life that suddenly felt like a lie. I knew that feeling too well. "You have to fix this," my mother begged. "Tell him this doesn't change who his father is." I let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, but it does. It changes everything. And I'm not fixing anything. You and Dad chose to protect my brother. Now he has to deal with the consequences. Goodbye, Mom." I ended the call before she could say another word. Days passed. I told myself it wasn't my problem, but when I heard a knock late one evening, I wasn't surprised to see my nephew standing there, face weary, eyes red-rimmed. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice breaking. I handed him a bottle of water and sat down. "Take your time." He sat across from me, his breath shaky. "My dad, he denied it at first. Said you were twisting things. But when I showed him the proof, the dates, the papers, he couldn't escape it. He called it a mistake, said it was complicated. But it wasn't complicated, was it? He betrayed you. He lied to me. And Mom let it happen." "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't complicated." He ran a hand through his hair. "I can't even look at him. I left. My fiancé doesn't understand. My grandparents are furious. And now I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're still you," I said gently. "This doesn't change that." "It changes everything," he whispered. "Every memory I have of him, and my wedding. How am I supposed to stand up there with him by my side, knowing what I know?" "Do you want him there?" "No." "Then don't invite him." He stared at me. "It's not that easy." "Sure it is. This is your life. You decide who stands beside you." "And the rest of the family? They'll never forgive me." I shrugged. "Then let them be angry. They chose him over the truth. That's on them, not you." He was silent, the war within. Him clear. Finally he asked, "How did you do it? Walk away?" "Because I had to," I said softly. "Because every time I looked at them, all I saw was betrayal, and I couldn't live with that." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Then he asked the one question I wasn't prepared for. "Do you regret it?" I hesitated. Did I? I had spent years convincing myself cutting them off was the only way to survive, but watching him grapple with the same pain, I wasn't so sure. "Some days," I admitted, "but not enough to go back." He stood abruptly, pacing the room before turning back to me. "If I uninvite my dad, if I go through with this, will you come?" His voice was small, hopeful. For years, I told myself I had nothing left to give, nothing tying me to that part of my life. But looking at him now, I realized that wasn't entirely true. "I'll be there," I said. His shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you." He left soon after, still burdened by the decision ahead. I didn't sway him. This was his to carry. Now. But as I watched him drive away, I knew I'd made the right choice, even if it had taken me years to get here. The day of the wedding arrived, heavy with tension. My nephew had made his decision. His father was not invited. The fallout rippled through the family. My mother called 3 times in 48 hours, each time more desperate. "You don't understand what you're doing to this family," she said. But she was wrong. I understood perfectly. I arrived early, dressed in a dark suit, watching guests take their seats. My nephew stood near the altar, composed but tight with nerves. When I approached, he managed a weary smile. "You came." "I told you I would." He exhaled heavily. "I keep expecting him to show up, to make a scene." "He won't," I said, but I wasn't sure. My brother never accepted consequences. The ceremony was beautiful, his fiancée radiant, their vows heartfelt. But I saw it in his eyes, the shadow of absence, the weight of betrayal. Still, he stood tall. At the reception, whispers followed him. Some guests knew the truth. Others only suspected. My mother and father sat stiff and silent at a corner table. Their disappointment was palpable. I wasn't sure why they'd come if they didn't support his choice. Maybe they thought they could still change his mind. Then my brother arrived. He stood at the entrance, face unreadable. The air shifted. Guests noticed, murmurs rising. My nephew froze when their eyes met. Son. Not an apology, an expectation. My nephew straightened, his face calm, his voice steady. "You shouldn't be here." "I just wanted to talk," my brother said, calculated and calm. "This is your wedding day. I should be part of it." My nephew didn't answer right away. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw something new in his eyes. Resolve. "You were right," he said softly. Then he turned back to his father. "You need to leave." My brother's eyes flickered. Shock, maybe even pain. But he didn't argue. He nodded once, turned and walked away. Just like that, the weight lifted. My nephew exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. Then he looked at me. "Thank you." I nodded. "You did this on your own." "Maybe," he admitted. "But I wouldn't have had the courage if you hadn't told me the truth." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's what family is supposed to do." And for the first time in years, I felt like I finally had one again.